as a full-fledged theory. They have not mentioned about it. Well, of course, we find some notions like kairos, in Booth's idea of rhetorical stance that might in a way talk about, suggest something about rhetorical situation, but before Bidger, I didn't find any full-fledged theory that mentioned about the notions of rhetorical situation, which is in fact very important in the rhetorical tradition of rhetorical theory. So I decided to work on this project. So that's why my research begins from Bidger's ideas of those rhetorical situation. He talks about exigence, audience, and constraints as three components, constituents of the rhetorical situation. By exigence means the urgency that's needed to be solved very quickly, and audience we know, and the constant means the traditions, the belief of audience or rhetors or situation that constrains the design and the construction of the rhetorical discourse. And what I found in his definition is that it is real. He treats rhetorical situation as a real, genuine, objective, based on historical reality. It's something real, and he also conceives them as having the linear relationship between the constituents of rhetorical situation. And he also, one thing that I want to focus more is that what is the antecedent of what? Say for example, Bidger talks about exigence is the antecedent of the rhetorical discourse. Exigence invites, in a way, creates, causes the rhetorical discourse. In his definition, I mean, there are some problems because he perceives the constituents of rhetorical situation as something linear, as some discrete, real entity. There is no kind of connection between or among the constituents of rhetorical situation. Later, Richard Bhatt just upside it, he made the definition upside down by talking about it's not the rhetorical situation or exigence that invites the rhetorical discourse, rather it's the rhetor's ability that invites or that creates the rhetorical situation. So in a way, the picture, we can see the picture, two contradictory picture. While Bidger, what he says that rhetorical discourse is situational, whereas Bhatt talks about rhetoric. It's not situation is rhetoric. It's a rhetorical construct. It's rhetor's ability to construct the situation. So, and what Consigny tries to do here is that he tries to balance these two ideas, but even in his balance there is a problem because he also doesn't mention about the value, the significance of audience. In all of their dialogue, their conversation, what I found lacking is the good treatment to audience, to conceive the notion of audience. They always conceive the audience or reader as someone having subservient role. Readers in their model do not have powerful role. It's just a kind of a recipient of the message. Doesn't have any say, any control to influence the text, the rhetorical discourse, or message. So I see kind of modernist contentment in their definition, not only in the definition of Bidger, Bhatt, and the Consigny model, but there are many others who followed or in a way argued against sometimes, but in totality I have a kind of impression that they have modernist contentment. This modernist contentment, I believe, cannot in a way address the changed notion of rhetorical situation. Because I do believe that now because of the impact of new media and technology, our our communicative practices have changed. We think in a different way, we write, even think in a different way because of the impact of new media and technology, which they have not addressed. Because of this existing, or I would say traditional notions of the rhetorical situation cannot capture the changed meaning of the rhetorical situation. And as a result, it limits the scope of the rhetorical situation, makes it obsolete, kind of stagnant, and for this reason, I kind of look for the exigency of a new theory that incorporates the changed notions. So first what I do is that first I argue for the exigency on this backdrop. On the backdrop that the traditional notions of rhetorical situation cannot address the changing notion or changed notion, and the new media and technology have so much impacted our habit, our literacy practices, that the old notion, traditional notions of the rhetorical situation can no longer fruitfully work, can no longer fully work, I mean. So for this reason, I propose a theory in order to fit into the change situation. And in order to propose a theory, what I do is that I map, remap, and re-examine the concurring Bitjer-Bhatt-Kanchani debate and other debate. So in order to do so, I have 4 inquiry questions. They are directly related to my chapter. First question: in the period of 1968 to 2013, how has the concept of rhetorical situation and its various naming permutations been variously characterized? I'm going to talk about this in chapter 2. And chapter 3, how did the emergence of new media and technology compel the revision of our notions of the rhetorical situation? What theories can help the revision of our notions of the rhetorical situation in chapter 4? And then I'm going to talk about what the rhetorical situation as trans-situational network ecologies indicates for the discipline of RWS in chapter 5. This is my theory: trans-situational network ecology, rhetorical situation as trans-situational network ecology, how it's going to contribute our discipline. So this is my plan. So for method, my methodology is primarily it's bibliographic research. I'm much influenced by Stephen North's idea of modes of inquiry, that of scholars. I'm going to use the modes of inquiry, that of scholar, not others. And in this modes of inquiry, I'm going to do historical and theoretical mapping. Historical mapping has 2 stages: empirical and interpretive stages. In empirical stage, what I'm going to do is that I collect all the existing material, existing notions, understanding about the rhetorical situation, and in interpretive stage, I'm going to create a narrative that chronicles its changes over time. This is how I'm going to plan it. And apart from that, I also going to use philosophical inquiry, definitely, in which I account for, frame, critique, analyze the fundamental assumptions and beliefs, and finally propose a theory. Then another studies that I'm going to do is rhetorical inquiry. First, on the rhetorical inquiry, I'm going to identify a motivating concern, pose questions, engage in heuristic search, create a new theory of or hypothesis, and justifying the theory. I borrowed this from Laura and Ashley. And the last thing, my perspective would be postmodern theoretical framework. And I also going to use Foucault's notion of discursive formation in analyzing the relationship between the constituents of the rhetorical situation. And I'll do the mapping first. 1968 to 2013. I have categorized the mapping in 3 different categories. The first, Bitjer, Bhatt, Kanchani, and more debate from 1968 to 1974. what I found is that why I divided, I have a kind of rationale for that. On this category, we can analyze or see most of the traditional notions of the rhetorical situation. That treats the constituents of rhetorical situation as something real, something objective, something genuine, something very observable fact. But in the second part, a departure from their debate, I found a little bit departure. Some people started talking about deconstruction. So for example, Bishaker talks about a kind of deconstructive departure from the traditional notion and tries to include a kind of deconstructive rupture. Tries to see the notions of the rhetorical situation from different perspectives. And in this time span, a network complex system from 2004 to 2013 is a kind of, here I can see a complete departure from the traditional, but it's still, they also have not developed it fully. The people who talk about it, the scholars like Ed Bauer, Hall, they talk about network complex system in treating the notions of rhetorical situation. But they have suggested, they have talked a little bit, but they have not theorized the notions of rhetorical situation as such. And what I do is that I just develop, I have dissonance with their notions. I bring in some notions of this time span era, and then I develop their notions into mine by using my theory, some of the terms from Phelps, from Cooper, from Foster's network, the term I have used that one. And by incorporating these theories, I build up my theories on the notions of rhetorical situation. So first what I do is that before proposing a theory, I first talk about new media and technology because it's a major component in my part, because this is the kind of solid foundation on which I want to stand and argue. Because it's because of the new media and the technology, I'm arguing that the notions of the rhetorical situations have changed. For that reason, I kind of feel like defining new media and technology, it's computerization and multimodality, interactivity, hypertextuality, all these different features of the new media and technology caused a kind of change in the notions of rhetorical situation, contributed a change because of new media and technology, hypertextuality, interactivity, multimodality. Because of this feature, we started thinking about the situation, rhetorical situation, in a different way. We started writing in a different way. We no longer write the way we used to write in the past. Our writing is multimodal, hypertextual. It's not kind of linear. The print media was kind of linear, was written in linear fashion, from one line to another, first paragraph to second paragraph. But here, our reader is so free that he or she can navigate the text in any order they like. So it has, in a way, revolutionized the way we think, the way we write, and the way we read. So for that reason, I define this term and try to see how new media and technology changed the notions of rhetorical situation. Based on the features I discussed above, I analyze how the traditional relationship between the constituents of rhetorical situation have changed. For example, in hypertextuality gives a space to the audience, to the reader, to influence even the writer, even the author. In a way, it empowers the audience, the reader, in such a way that the hierarchy, the line, the modernist line, binary opposition between author and reader is broken. So it has, in a way, revolutionized the way we think, the way we read, the way we perceive, and in a sense, the way we perceive the notions of the rhetorical situation. So now, to analyze the theories of the rhetorical situation, I use basically these three theories: theories of critical geography, critical theory of technology, rhetoric, and language theory. By bringing the theories of critical geography of Shoja, Shack, Shipley, Creswell, Delaney, I talk about the distinction between place, space, and territory. The distinction between these three notions on the basis of the theories of critical geography equipped me to come with the new notions of the rhetorical location. I have added a new constituents of the rhetorical situation based on this. Because what I believe is that the traditional notions of the rhetorical situation perceives or conceives location as a place, just as a place, something having physical address, where you actually live, in a word, the location. They ignores the notion of space that has more abstract, political, ideological notion. So by using these distinctions made in the theories of critical geography, I came up with the new notion, that's a rhetorical location. I have defined it in different way. My position is that we should take care of this. We should add this to the notions of rhetorical situation. And then I talk about critical theory of technology, like using Bolter's, Finberg's, and Johnson's idea of democratization of technology. They talk about Bolter, Finberg, and Johnson talk about democratization of technology. By extension, democratization of technology means democratization of the users. With using technology, the users, the readers, the audience, in a way. So, in indirect way, this notion, democratization of technology, liberates the reader, liberates the author, and breaks the binary, blurs the line between the reader and the audience. Likewise, I use the notion of Johnson, Lola, and Marville there. Johnson's notion about data cloud. He talks about data cloud, and Marville talks about findability. Both means in this information age, the informations are there, and the writer is no longer a writer. Writer is just an assimilator, a manipulator of information. You don't have to create information. Informations are there already. Just you can reach with the tips of your finger, anytime, anywhere. You don't have to find a book, a print. It's there. So as a writer, what you do is you just assimilate, just collect, just manipulate the information, to fit your purpose, your interests, your background, whatever. So that, by the same token, this findability and the notion of the data cloud liberated the audience, because audience also, readers also can manipulate the data now. They can find out the type of data they want to look for. So in a way, this theory has talked about liberating readers from their subservient position and empowering them to influence the message, to influence the audience. Sorry. And by using Nietzsche and Berlin's notions of rhetoric and language theory, I argue that any language, as Nietzsche says, is rhetorical, and by the same token, Beecher says any language is ideological. So whenever a language is ideological, that means rhetorical discourse is ideological, it is conflicting, always, because it's plural. And I have used these notions to argue the plurality of the rhetorical discourse. What Beecher talks about, I'll take back, Beecher talks about the singularity of the rhetorical discourse. An exigence causes a rhetorical discourse. There is a kind of one-to-one relationship. But when you take a rhetorical discourse as an ideology, as an expression of ideology, so it automatically is plural. So rhetorical discourses are plural. It's ideological. It's ideological in the sense that the author expresses his or her ideology through rhetoric to influence the audience. So in that sense, it's plural. That's my take. Now, to examine the notions of, first what I do is that before proposing a theory, I first examine the existing notions of the rhetorical situation. So what I do here is that I revisit the mapping that I did in chapter 2, and while revisiting it, I show my dissonance with the existing notions of the rhetorical situation, where I disagree, and why I disagree. That way. And I examine why these notions are not appropriate in today's communication and why this needs to be revised. So if there are some theories that could be developed, if any, I question, I examine how that could be developed to propose a theory. And then I talk about what needs to be retheorized to make a viable concept of our contemporary notions of the rhetorical situations. While talking about the exigency for a new theory, I think that there are two reasons of the exigency. The first reason I've already talked, the existing or traditional notions of the rhetorical situation do not outright address or incorporate the change notion first. Second thing is because of the advent of new media and technology, our communicative practices have so much changed that the existing notions do not address this change situation. Based on these two reasons, I talk about the problems with some existing notion. What are the problems? Why we need a new theory? I analyze this issue. And I also talk about how new media and technology have contributed for the exigency for a new theory. And then what needs to be retheorized again, what is necessary, how we can make the new notions of the rhetorical situation more explanatory than the existing one. I argue for that. So ultimately, finally, I propose a theory that's a rhetorical situation as trans-situational network ecologies. First, I propose this theory based on some assumptions, some defining features of this theory. The defining features are ecology, network, complex adaptive system, and postmodern relations. Its components are definitely author-reader text, exigence, rhetorical discourse, rhetorical location, rhetorical territoriality. I will explain this individually. Ecology, in fact, network and complex adaptive system are the part of ecology. So I'm not going to address that separately. So when we perceive a rhetorical situation in terms of ecology, this stabilizes the discrete borders of rhetorical situation and provides a framework of affective ecologies. We can perceive it not as discrete entity, separate entity, but all the members, the constituents are the members or the constituents of the same ecology, influencing each other. So what happens here is that all the rhetorical constituents of rhetorical system interact dynamically to form a system. And whenever one of the constituents of the rhetorical situation changes, it affects changes in the system, and it automatically co-adapts. It goes on co-adapting that way, and it goes on constantly changing and changing themselves and changing others. So in this way, our constituent of rhetorical situation is not in isolation. It's not a discrete entity. Whenever there is some change, it causes change in others. And ultimately, it causes change in the system as such. So the system automatically goes on changing, goes on co-adapting. So this is my, and because of this, I perceive it as a wave in which the moments of an element causes vibration in the whole system. And the relation between them are recursive relation, discrete, not discrete but network. And I already taught complex adaptive system. They change themselves and they co-adapt. They help each other, cooperate each other to adapt in the new situation and to form the new situation. Because of this, the constituents of rhetorical situations are always plural, always fluid, always changing. We cannot perceive them as something discrete, something solid, having physicality, having historical reality, unchanged identity. No, it goes on changing all the time. And I see it in a postmodern relations. All the constituents of rhetorical situations are in postmodern relations. They are fluid, plural, and it frees the audience. And how it frees the audience is that the audience has power to negotiate meaning with the author, with the text. Audience is no longer in subservient position. Audience is very powerful, has the capacity to change, even to change the message, the text. So there is a kind of, because of this, there is a kind of postmodern ruptures of the lines between the reader, writer, text, and the relationship. Now, about the components, author, reader, text. Well, author, as I have already mentioned about it, all these author, readers, and the text as the major constituents of the rhetorical situation, they negotiate with each other and have agency. In Bidger's or in the traditional model of the rhetorical situation, reader doesn't have agency. But here, readers also have agency. Readers can control, can influence the message, the author. So, in this sense, readers assume author-like role, kind of. And readers are not so controlling power here. Rhetors are just craftsmen of the rhetorical discourse, not author. They cannot author it. They cannot own it. Just they can have kind of, the role of craftsman, designer, kind of manipulator of the message. So their relationship are plural and transactional network ecologies. About exigence, again, I disagree with the existing notion, and I argue that the exigence is plural, fluid, because it invites indefinite number of the rhetorical discourse. Exigence does not necessarily just invite only one response, the rhetorical discourse, because it's the number or the whatever is based on the author's capacity to control, to write, to think, author's interest, purpose, ideology, author's ability to conceive the existence. So in that sense, exigence are always plural. Exigence is epistemic because it depends on author's purpose, interests, and natures. And so rhetorical discourse is guided by author's ability to manipulate, author's interest to design, and author's negotiation with writer as well. It's a kind of ecology, crisscross. And I talk about rhetorical discourse. Rhetorical discourse is not a fixed entity, it's plural. It is based on the rhetor's interest and ability to define the situation and to understand the rhetorical exigencies. So, very interesting thing I want to make here is that it influences the constituents of the rhetorical situation as well. It has that power. It's not only the reader who can influence the author. It's also the rhetorical discourse that can influence both author and the reader. Because it's through the rhetorical discourse the reader understands about the world. The reader's perception about the world is changed because rhetorical discourse influences them. So it also influences the author. Author is not that free to create. Because when the author revisits it, the author changes it. When the author reads it, authors might get different meaning from it. So in a way, rhetorical discourse also influences rhetorical discourse also influences other constituents of the rhetorical situation because it's ideological. It has kind of influence, impression, and it's always changing. These are the two notions I already talked about it. Rhetorical location and rhetorical territoriality are the two terms I added here in the notions of the rhetorical situation. So rhetorical location is not just a concrete place where you actually live and experience in communicative practice. It is associated with the notions of space and territoriality. It is associated with the abstract notion of place, space, that is a postmodern space. So, because space has, or rhetorical location has, spatiality as a material product of the relationship between social and spatial structure, which is completely ignored in the notions of the traditional notions of the rhetorical situation. Rhetorical location for me is a social, political, and ideological product. So whenever someone writes something, this has a very significant role. You have to think about its politics, ideology. It's not only about where, in what situation, physical location, the discourse was designed. In what political, ideological, social context it is designed. That's also very much important. So I think this fact should be taken into consideration when revising the notions of the rhetorical situation. So because rhetorical location makes you able to argue, makes you able to discuss who is involved, what is the social context, what ideology is governing, what politics is in the play, which is completely ignored in the traditional notions of the rhetorical situation. Mechanistically, they treated the constituents of rhetorical situation mechanistically, not in terms of its impact in the society, the politics, the ideology. Rhetorical territoriality is related to the space. This kind of gives you idea how interlocutors organize themselves in space to influence and affect others by controlling the language as a rhetorical strategy, how they organize in space. And it investigates the power relations between the constituents of rhetorical situation. Who is speaking? On what status power he or she is speaking? On what situation? What territoriality? So these are I found very interesting, very important, significant thing to talk about the notions of rhetorical situation. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about the contribution in terms of justification and significance in rhetoric and writing studies program. I argue that my theory rhetorical situation as trans-situational network ecology has contribution in general, has justification and a contribution in RWS, and in particular it can contribute scholars, it can contribute writing instructors, students, and rhetoric and writing program as such. Let me talk one by one. So how does it contribute to a scholar? Scholars can build up theories of rhetorical situation as well as they can re-envision courses for the RWS majors. Because what I do in my theory is that I must talk about incorporating new media and technology, one thing, incorporating postmodern notions, deconstructing the existing things. These ideas scholars can exploit, can use, and design course, and do research. More importantly, this theory gives kind of critical approach to see at anything, and it modifies traditional notions of the rhetorical situation in textbook. We usually what we find is that we usually find Beecher's version of the rhetorical situation for its simplicity, most probably. So we only teach, we write about that, this notion, and this theory kind of enrich even scholars to design courses on the rhetorical situation in a different way. So it can incorporate the impact of new media and technology, and very importantly, what I found is that my theory breaks the theory and practice binaries. What I have from my lit review in the rhetorical theory, what I found that theory is always associated with the rhetoric and the practice is always associated with the composition. There is a kind of binary, which is not good. I think that way, which is not good. We should break this binary, blend this binary, and my theory does that. In a way, I bring both theories and a practice together and argue for a new theory that has more explanatory power, that is more, useful, practical. And because of that, the scholars can break this binary. About writing instructors also teach the enriched courses with the new insight of rhetorical situation, not just the traditional. Sometimes it's problematic to teach like first year composition student, this very complex, more subtle, more complex notions of rhetorical situation. It's a good idea to begin with the Beecher's notions, simple notions of the rhetorical situation. But while teaching the simple notion, it's also a good idea to enrich the simple notion with this new notion of the rhetorical situation. So writing instructors can incorporate it in first year composition while teaching the writing major courses, advanced writing courses, or rhetoric courses. It's a good idea to incorporate it fully. And it teaches kind of encourages writing instructors postmodern approach, critical pedagogy that teaches them how to critique, how to analyze, how to debate. That's very important. This is a kind of bedrock of rhetoric and composition, as much as I have understood. So it teaches kind of how to critique. Okay, students. For students, it encourages gives critical understanding of everything, how to examine, discuss, debate, contest, and scrutinize the ideologies. And it also gives the discipline. Very important thing I will be talking about while talking that part. It gives kind of disciplinary status to rhetoric and writing studies programs. And since it gives disciplinary knowledge to students, from this perspective, the student can use it as a deterministic screen to see the world, to see everything from this perspective. Because it enriches, they have a kind of feeling that we are in a discipline. Ours is a discipline. So we can think in our own way. We are not the sub-discipline of a department, another discipline. So that kind of feeling the students will have, I mean. The last, but not the least, very important is how does it contribute to rhetoric and writing studies. It, again, enriches with postmodern philosophy. Because I talk a lot, in my theory, talk about postmodern philosophy. So, the new media and technology to enrich our discipline. So I have talked much about use or incorporation of new media and technology. So what rhetoric and writing studies can do is that by taking the insight from this theory, rhetoric and writing studies always can update its discipline by incorporating new media and technology in every aspect. By incorporating new media and technology, I mean not just to use technology as a tool, just a tool, an instrument. Technology as a philosophy, as a way of looking at things. That kind of perspective broadens the scope of the rhetoric and writing studies. And it gives disciplinary status because my theory is informed by, as I've already mentioned, critical theories of technology, theories of critical geography, rhetoric and language theory, complexity theory. So in a way, I'm kind of, inherently arguing for transdisciplinarity. And it is this transdisciplinarity in my theory that kind of encourages, that kind of contributes rhetoric and writing studies program, gives a kind of disciplinary status and frees this program from the sub-disciplinarity. Now unfortunately, mostly our discipline is in a way treated as a sub-discipline of another discipline, which is in a way not good. So this theory can enrich our program, contribute to maintain the disciplinary status, and contribute a lot to do more research on the notions of rhetorical situation in general, and the rhetorical theory in general, and the notions of the rhetorical situation in particular. Thank you.
Nicely done. And I love your big plans at the end. Your theory is going to change the world. The discipline. The discipline.
That would be great. We'll settle for the discipline.
Yeah, we'll start with the discipline. So thanks very much. So what we'll do now is the committee can ask a few questions if you have them. I think you do. And then I have maybe a couple if we have time. And then we'll step out and confer while the peanut gallery here can talk with you more about your ideas if they'd like to. So I will then Stacey, would you like to start?
Okay.
Well, I was going to start with the title, so maybe that seems like the logical place to start. In your title, you changed your title from
Yeah,
draft.
yeah, lately.
And now it says, you use the phrase toward a transactional network ecology, but in the body of the dissertation, you're still referring to it as the transsituational network ecology. What's the difference between the two? I'm having a little trouble
I
understanding.
mean, the name of the theory and the title. I think the title represents the theory, because in the theory also I talk about like trans-situational network ecology, and more or less same words I have used, but I didn't use the word transactional in my theory because it's understood. I talk about transactional relationship a lot while talking about it, but sometimes it will be too long. title, the theory that could be kind of not applicable, like not readable sometimes, weird. In order to shorten it, I didn't mention that term in the title of my theory, but in the title of my dissertation I did that.
Do you think they should be the same?
Well, either that or I think giving an explanation of the difference. And I don't know how you explain it to me. I don't know. It just threw me a little bit because I was expecting when I got to the end of the theory to have the word transaction on it.
Oh,
And
okay.
I saw you had changed it and I couldn't quite
Yeah,
figure it out.
you're right. I can interpret that too, but I talked a lot about transactional relationship. I mean, I'm talking about the features, basic defining features of my theory, but not the term. There is no term. I can change that.
Yeah, and then the question is, how will you test this new theory? Because you did an excellent job of looking at all of the theories and explaining how you agree or disagree. But how will you test your theory?
Okay, that's an interesting question. One of the way I think I talked about blending of theory and practice. That's a part of my theory. So what I'm thinking about is that to do research, even like any research in first year composition class or rhetoric and writing major class, as an instructor, I'm planning to blend theory and practice together, like the theoretical notions of the Western and non-Western rhetoric, and how the notions of Western and non-Western theories, rhetoric can be problematized, can be blurred in real life situation. I mean, in the class. So to blend that theory into practice, I'm gonna engage my student, the instructors, in debate, in classroom activities. That way, I guess I can test it later. The one thing. Another, I have proposed, suggested that we can my theory by using the insights from my theory. We can design courses on the writing and rhetoric majors. I've talked towards the end of my dissertation. I think I can do these two things later as my future plan for my research. That way I can test.
I'd like to see that because I thought that assignment sounded really interesting, but I can't for the life of me figure out how you would do it with your theory. I think it'd be very helpful in your chapter 5 if you could spell out
Okay.
the Western versus non-Western.
Thank
What
you.
would the assignment look like? What would the
Oh yeah, right.
How do you make that work within your own theory? You see what I mean?
Yeah. I have kind of reserved that for my future plan. I thought,
Well,
yeah,
maybe you should.
yeah,
Yeah,
because I
think you do
thought,
that.
giving all the methodologies, all the research, strategies in chapter 5 would be kind of irrelevant sometimes. I thought that way.
That's tough because your dissertation almost reads like pure research that only other scholars would be interested in.
Right.
But then you go on to say, no, I want to use it in a worthy way, I want to apply it. But you don't apply this dissertation, so it kind of leaves the reader thinking, well, how does that work? Maybe that's your next dissertation or your next book.
It's a kind of paradoxical. I'm talking about blending theory and practices, but my theory is theoretical more, right? It happens because it's theory making.
I think at one point when we talked briefly about this on email, there was another chapter
Right.
when you had thought that maybe you would have an entire chapter dedicated to that.
Right.
And you decided that maybe the dissertation didn't need an entire 6th
Yeah.
chapter, and so it got shortened to the end of this one because
Right.
you were very clear in the beginning about not wanting to make it pure theory with no application.
Right.
But then it became a
Right.
shorter version. So but I think it might be useful in your revision to think about an example of how students.
A simple example.
That's
A
I
simple
didn't cover.
example.
Thank you
And I'm
for
thinking,
suggestions.
were talking, I was thinking of like the Trayvon Martin case and how students might think of something that's so much in the media and there's so much conflicting discourse about it.
Yeah.
And how it changes so much depending on who's speaking and where they're speaking
Right.
from. So maybe something like that you could use as an example to
Yeah.
create a model application. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
I'd just like to see how we work in practice.
Well, first I'd like to say that I thought your dissertation was very intellectually engaging, and so I appreciated that. I just really liked the idea that you drew from all of these different theories and different places to really take the kind of key term of the discipline and really run with it and bring in all of these different kinds of space and territoriality and media. So I really enjoyed reading it. The big question I have for you is really about the democratization of the users. So let me just say a couple of things, and then I'd like to ask you for some examples of how you see that playing out. I guess in reading the sections and where you use the democratization of the users, I was struck by the sources that you're using. They're kind of dated, I would say. I think your latest source is 2006, but most of them are from the 90s. And I think in that period of time, we really did see the internet, for example, as a way to democratize and increase participation in politics. And I think that we have seen some of that, but as I was reading, I just kept thinking of examples of where the reader is still in a subservient role to the author. So even though it's changed the way that we think and the way that we write, I still see a lot of ways in which the reader is still subservient and not a co-author, and maybe the way some of those authors that you're talking about have written about. So that's one thought that I had, and then I was just trying to think about all of the different ways in which social media have changed the way that we think and how we use, and mostly I'm thinking about Twitter and Facebook, but just thinking about how maybe the hypertextuality, like you think about how people retweet messages. So does that mean that the first tweet, that's the author, and then the retweeters, who are they? Are they the authors also? That's maybe one kind of example of blurring that line between reader and author a little bit. But then how does that play out? And then also, maybe say status updates on Facebook where you have people making a status update, and then what's the exigence behind that, right? So is it about look at me and look at what I'm doing, or what is it that people are trying to do in posting a status update? And then how people respond and comment to that. So one of the big changes, I think, is really about the immediacy of the response, which has really changed from, say, sort of the traditional, I published a book, and then 6 months later there are some reviews, or maybe 2 years later, or whatever the case may be. So I think that there are some examples, but I guess my question is that I don't see those in the dissertation, and I think that means that you're losing your argument a little bit. So I'm wondering what you had in mind when you were thinking about the democratization of the user and how you might see the reader-user, the reader-author, what was it, the use of the author-reader text and some of those exigencies. What are some examples that you were thinking about when you were writing your dissertation?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. You talked about Facebook and Twitter. How I perceive that is that, say, for example, Facebook posting. You post something, you are author, right? But anyone can comment on that. Anyone can comment, revision, or kind of influence the author. So there is the binary between the author and the reader is gone. The reader, whenever the reader writes something, the reader is treated as author. I think I should have mentioned in detail about it. That's what you are suggesting, right?
Well, I'm thinking maybe you could give some more examples.
Okay, that's a great idea.
They don't have to be detailed
I have not done
examples,
that, yeah.
but I think it would be interesting to see some examples of how
Some
you see that
examples.
playing out.
I mean, some concrete example how that is played out.
Right, because even with the status update, the
Yeah.
author is still the author that originally posted that, but it
Right.
does change the way, because people comment and then the author will comment, and then, so you have that kind of interaction.
My
which I think
position
is
is that author is author, no doubt, but the role, the kind of power author has, that's changed, I mean. You write something, you are author. You cannot be a reader. You are still author, but your role as an author, as a writer, is changed. The reader's role as a reader is changed now. That's my argument.
Well, and then I could also see ways in which, say, a Google Docs, for example, where you actually post something and then people go in and actually do change the
Right.
writing. So maybe that's another example, or maybe that's what you had in mind in
good
thinking
suggestion.
about the author-reader text
Right.
and how that changes. But I would just like to see some more examples, because I think what happens in that literature, especially from the late 90s, early 2000s, is that it really romanticizes the democratization process.
Yeah.
And so we think, oh yes, the internet's going to open up all of these possibilities, and it has, but probably not in the ways that we thought it was going to, because we're talking about authors who are writing pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, and I think that they had envisioned something happening in a different way. So I think some examples, and I don't know if you had other examples.
No,
in
there
mind.
are plenty. There are plenty. I think I can incorporate them. I can do that. Thank you very much for the suggestion.
I think that's a good
Yeah,
suggestion.
that's good.
With your theory, I think you actually explained it better today than it's written in your dissertation. And your theory is still buried within what we've learned from all of the others. And if you had some way of presenting it a little more clearly in that last chapter and adding the examples,
That's great.
it would make the instructor who wants to use it understand what needs to happen.
Well, and another example I was thinking about just as you were talking, and I think Evelyn's point is right on, that in the last chapter, or I mean your presentation made me think about globalization, which you mentioned. And that's another interesting way, right, that changes the way that people think and how they use language, because Facebook is a lot more globalizing force than we probably really think of. So I can think of lots of really interesting examples that come out
But I
of
agree.
language use.
It's very interesting situation.
Thank you.
Well, and one of the things, you and I didn't get a chance to sit down and talk about it, but remember I put a little comment that said, and I kept inserting potential, like the potential power, the potential revision, the potential ways that readers can become writers, and where that gets mixed up. And I kept saying, I don't know if you think potential is what you want to say, but I'm reading it as readers don't necessarily always take that power, right?
Right.
Sometimes they're willing
I
to
mean,
be,
yes.
and sometimes they're not given the opportunity to have that power. So it's almost like a potential power.
It's not
The
taking.
possibility is,
Right.
and I think that's getting a little bit to what you're suggesting too,
Yeah.
that it's not as empowering.
Right.
as you might think it
It's
is.
not
Yeah.
about taking the power. It's about taking the role,
Mhm.
that like role, author-like role. Not the author. Author is author. I mean, in a way. Right.
But that's really modernist of you to say.
The role. I mean, the role changes.